So 9.2 is interpreting and making predictions with bar graphs. So some of this might be a review from you, but we are going to take it a step further and find percents of the different totals and whatnot. So to refresh your memory, so a bar graph is a great way to compare data. It can be represented both vertically or horizontally. Some important things to remember that the longer the bar, the greater the value. And then the sum of all the bars is the total of all the pieces together. So that's the first thing that I like to do when I see a bar graph is I get the total right away. So let's look at this first bar graph that we have about color tiles. So something to notice is some of these bars are in between the benchmark data that represents it. So you're going to have to look at the little hash marks. So what I notice is it's 0 to 3, which is listed, but then there's 2 marks in between, which could represent 1 and 2. So then you have 0, 1, 2, 3, and then you could have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. And then 21. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to write how much each tile represents, each bar represents of those different tiles. The first one is red. Red represents 20 because it's in line with that second hash mark between 18 and 21. So I'm going to list 20 there. Blue falls between 6 and 9, and it is closer to 8. Green, which is really nice, it falls right on that line, which I see is 12. And yellow falls between 9 and 12, which is 10. So now let's look at some of the questions that it's asking. So a brown paper sack is filled with colored tiles for a science experiment. We're going to list the number of tiles for each color in these blanks. So red is 20. Blue is 8, green is 12, yellow is 10. So because we listed it on that bar graph, it's really easy to go back and see what each of those tiles represent, each of those bars represent. So then how many of these tiles are in the brown paper sack? So then we add those up and we would have 50 total tiles. So let's look at the percentages. So what percent of the tiles are blue? So in order to solve that, we can set up a percent proportion. So remember what that means is your part over your whole equals your percent over 100. So I'm looking for blue. Blue, the number is the part. So 8 is the part. My total is 50. I'm looking for my percent over 100. Now your percent is always out of 100. I see that 50 to 100 is times 2. So 8 times 2 would then give me 16%. That would be my answer for the blue tiles. So I'm going to go and look at green. There's 12 tiles for green. I want the percent again for the green. So there's 12 out of 50. Equals x over 100. Now what's nice about this again is it's 50 to 100, which is times 2. So I'm also going to do 12 times 2, which is 24%. So number 3 asks, what two color tiles make up 60% of the tiles? So this is going about this a little bit differently. I'm not looking for a percent. I know the percent, but I don't know the part. So X would fall in the part category. I still know that there's 50 total equal, and 60 would be over 100 because that is the percent that I do know. So now I can look and I can solve it 2 different ways. I can see 100 divided by 2 is 50, or I can see 6 times 5 is 30, and then add 2 zeros equal 100x. Divide by 100, which means I'm just going to cancel out 2 zeros. So X is 30 tiles. So now I'm going to look to see on the bar graph which two make up 30 tiles. And I would say my red tiles, which is 20, and my yellow tiles, which is 10. So both of those together equal 30, which is what I want. So my answer there would be red and yellow. Okay, so now let's look at number 4. What two tile colors make up 36% of the tiles? So this is the same thing what we just did, so I am going to solve it very similar. I have X over 50 equals 36 over 100%. So 36 is my percent. I'm going to solve this one by dividing by 2. 100 divided by 2 is 50, and then I'm going to do 36 divided by 2. Now 36 divided by 2 is going to be 18. Now just to show my work, there's 18 tiles. It's not percent. That's what we already have. So for 18 tiles, I see a 10 for yellow, and then I have blue is 8. Add those together, and that's 18. So yellow and blue would be my answer. All right, so let's move on. It says Mrs. Reynolds creates a graph of the number of students who have birthdays in the first half of the year. Use the graph below to answer the questions. So it says determine the total number of students included in Miss Reynolds' graph. So once again, I'm going to look at my bar graph, and I'm going to determine the number of each student for the each month before I move on. So then for January, I see that January would be 16. February is 10. March would then be 18. April is 15. May is 5. And June is 11. So I'm going to take those now and add those up together. When I add those together, my total is going to be 75 students. Okay, so now let's look at number 6. If this is a representation of a sample of the entire 450 students in 7th grade, then how many students would have birthdays in February? So when I solve this, I can solve this using a percent proportion. Okay, so that means I'm going to set up my part to my whole equals percent over 100. Excuse me, I'm going to set this up, as a proportion, but not as a percent proportions, because I have 450 7th graders that I want to find. So for February, I have 10 over 75. So that's out of the data that we collected. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make a prediction of how many birthdays would be out of 450 students. So before we can do that, we look at 10 over 15, and I can simplify both of those by 5. And when I do that, my fraction is going to be 2 over 15. So that means 2 over 15 equals X over 450. So now I look to see 15 can go into 45 3 times. So with that 3 times, I'm going to add that extra 0, which is 30. So then 2 times 30 would be 60 students. So 60 students out of 450 would have a birthday in February. Okay, so now based on the information in the graph, which 2 months are responsible for a combined 20% of birthdays? Okay, 20%. So I'm going to set up, here's my percent proportion. I'm looking for how many have a birthday out of 75 over 20% out of 100%. So I'm going to solve it a little bit differently. Instead of solving it with a percent proportion, I'm going to actually use my decimal form of 20%. So my decimal form is 0.20. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply 0.20 times 75 to get my part. So this is my percent times my whole equals my part. And that's, I can solve it this way. So I'm going to take 75 times 0.20. Anything times 0 is 0, so I'm going to put my placeholder of x and 0, so x, so 2 times 5 is 10, 2 times 7 is 14, 15, and then I'm going to do my 2 zeros, or 2 decimal places, and I'm going to have 15 as my total for my birthday. So I'm looking back at my bar graph and I'm looking to see which 2 I could add up together, and that would be February, which is 10, and May, which is 5. Add those together and that would be 15. So February and May would be my answer there. Okay. So we finished the note part. So let's look at a couple questions from the homework or from just some extra work. So the bar graph below shows the grades of 30 students in Mrs. Crew's second period class. So here's my total. Okay. And let's look at the graph before we look at number 1 and 2. So even on these types of questions, I want to put the total above each bar graph, so that way it's easier for me to answer questions, especially multiple questions. So for A, there's 8 students. For B, there was 10 students. For C, there was 6 students. And D and F are alike. So I'm looking at the numbers and I see 2 to 4, which the middle number would be 3. So both of those would be 3. So now let's look at number 1 and 2. Based on the information in the graph, 60% of the students in Mrs. Crew's class have which grades? So here's 60%. I know I can set up a percent proportion. So I have x over 30 because 30 was in my answer, or excuse me, in my above my bar graph information, equals 60% over 100%. Now I want to go ahead and use the decimal form again just to show you once again how to do that. So that would be 0.60. So I would do 0.60 times 30. I always like to put the numeric value that has a larger number on top. So anything times 0 is 0. So then 0, 18. So I'm going to move that decimal over 2 places, 1, 2, and I'm going to look for a total of 18. So then I would see it can't, A is 8, C is 6, that would not add up. Once again, C is 6, D is 3, that would not work. B is 10, C is 6, that's 16, so it'd have to be A. All right, so let's look at number 2. Based on the information from the bar graph shown above, what percentage of students in Miss Crew's second period class currently have a C? So the question is asking what is the percentage there. So I would have my part over my whole, 30 over 60. Remember, when you do that, you can set it equal to 100, or you can just divide 6 in, 30 out to give you your 0 and your decimal. So 30 into 60 is 20%. So that would give me my answer. Hopefully a lot of this is a review for you. There might be some new things here. I will be posting this and then also putting a quizzes along with it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact any of your math teachers, 7th grade math teachers. We are available for questions. Just let us know. All right. Thanks so much.